Hi everyone. So this is Miss White. I'm here to do the reading of the CS Peirce reading. That is Peirce, pronounced like a purse, not Pierce, even though it looks like Pierce. I'm going to read through this today and talk you through my annotations, and hopefully this is helpful. So before we begin, really, this is to do with the Unit 4 reading or the Unit 4 study design and how should we form beliefs, especially like what responsibilities we have in the formation of our beliefs and whether we should look at experience in forming our beliefs. I find this piece particularly interesting as well because there are some connections to George Orwell's 1984. There's no proven um, connection that he was in fact inspired by Peirce's work or George Orwell was inspired. But when we get to a certain part of the reading, you'll definitely be able to tell that there are themes that seem a little bit 1984 in here. A little bit of some extra fun in there for you. So I'll read through and hopefully you find this helpful. I have put a lot of annotations on the side just because I find that the language is a little bit old. It's a little bit harder to understand. So I'll try and explain what exactly is going on as I talk through it, but hopefully it will be helpful. So, if the settlement of opinion is the sole object of inquiry, and if belief is of the nature of a habit, why should we not attain the desired end by taking as answer to a question any we may fancy and constantly reiterating it to ourselves, dwelling on all which may conduce that belief, and learning to turn with contempt and hatred from anything that might disturb it? So he's opened this piece or this section being like, well, if reaching a consensus, if being in agreement is important, then isn't it just easy to pick any answer that we like and then just refuse to listen to any of the others? And the next thing that he said that I've highlighted in yellow is that this simple and direct method is really pursued by many men. And you probably know people who just like they accept what's sort of comfortable and what's easy and will refuse to listen to anything that is different to their own belief. I remember once being entreated not to read a certain newspaper lest it might change my opinion upon free trade. So he's like, I have been told before not to read a certain newspaper that disagrees with my own opinion. Lest I might be entrapped by its fallacies and misstatements, was the form of expression. You are not, my friend said, a special student of political economy. You might therefore easily be deceived by fallacious arguments upon the subject. You might then, if you read the paper, be led to believe in protection, but you admit that free made is the true doctrine, and you do not wish to believe that what is not true. So he's like, his friend has told him, you shouldn't read this newspaper because it goes against your whole beliefs in free trade. Um, and Peirce continues, I have often known this system to be deliberately adopted. People purposely avoid reading the things that they know. Still oftener, the instinctive dislike of an undecided state of mind, exaggerated into a vague dread of doubt, makes men cling spasmodically, which means happening in spasms, so brief, sudden, irregular, to the views they already take. The man feels that if he holds to his belief without wavering, it will be entirely satisfactory, nor can it be denied that a steady and immovable faith yields a great peace of mind. So he's talking about how in this comfortable, if we just accept what's comfortable, it gives us great peace of mind. If we refuse to listen to anything else besides what we personally believe, um, we think it's worthwhile because we get that peace. It may indeed give rise to inconveniences, as if a man should resolutely continue to believe that fire would not burn him, or that he would be eternally damned if he received his ingesta, which means nourishment or food or drink, otherwise than through a stomach pump. But then the man who adopts this method will not allow that its inconveniences are greater than its advantages. He will say, I hold steadfastly to the truth, and the truth is always wholesome. And in many cases, it may very well be that the pleasure he derives from his calm faith overbalances any inconveniences resulting from its deceptive character. Thus, if it be true that death is annihilation, then the man who believes that he will certainly go straight to heaven when he dies, provided he have fulfilled certain simple observances in this life, has a cheap pleasure which will not be followed by the least disappointment. And so, what Peirce is getting at here is that, well, people, if they think that they could go to heaven, um, if they do a few simple things, they've got sort of this peace of mind, this cheap pleasure, which when they die, well, they're not going to know that they were wrong. So they sort of have this like little pleasure in life. Um, so that's what he's talking about there, which, as I said to my class when I was reading it today, that I think this oversimplifies religion a little bit, is that it's like, I don't know. I think this is a little bit of an oversimplification, that perhaps it's more than just a cheap pleasure, when people are believing in that final destination and that eternal life. A similar consideration seems to have weight with many persons on religious topics, for we frequently hear it said, "Oh, I could not believe so and so because I should be wretched if I did." So, not believing something because it's uncomfortable. And then he gives this example of an ostrich. When an ostrich buries its head in the sand as danger approaches, it very likely takes the happiest course. It hides the danger, then calmly says there is no danger. And if it feels perfectly sure there is none, why should it raise its head to see? So it's like, well, if an ostrich just buries its head in the sand, or if anyone just buries their heads in the sand and refuse to see if there's any danger, and they're sort of content with being in the sand, like, why would you ever look to see if there's danger? Um, a man may go through life systematically keeping out of view all that may cause change in his opinions. And if he only succeeds basing his method as he does on two fundamental psychological laws, I do not see what can be said against his doing so. It would be an egotistical impertinence to object that his procedure is irrational, for that only amounts to saying that his method of settling belief is not ours. He does not propose to himself to be rational, and indeed will often talk with scorn of man's weak and elusive reason. So let him think as he pleases. And so what he's saying here is that, yeah, this is an irrational way to think. It is irrational to just be like, okay, I'm going to believe whatever I want and not look at any other alternatives. But that person hasn't actually ever claimed to be rational. Like, so you can just leave them to believe whatever they please, which I think is an interesting way of thinking it. But this method of fixing belief, which may be called the method of tenacity, will be unable to hold its ground in practice. So here this is the first, he's going to talk about four different types of methods of forming beliefs. And the very first one, the one he's just described, is the method of tenacity. It's where you cling to your beliefs without wavering, deliberately avoiding alternative views. But he says here that this isn't practical. It's not going to work in practice. And why? Because a social impulse is against it. The man who adopts it will find that other men think differently from him, and will be apt to occur to him in some sane moment that their opinions are quite as good as his own, and this will shake his confidence in his belief. This conception that another man's thought or sentiment may be equivalent to one's own is a distinctly new step and highly important one. It arises from an impulse too strong in man to be suppressed, without danger of destroying the human species. Unless we make ourselves hermits, we shall necessarily influence each other's opinions, so that the problem becomes how to fix belief not in the individual merely, but in the community. So, what he's talking about here is that we have this social impulse, that we are naturally social creatures. And while this method of tenacity does, in fact, bring peace of mind, it fails in practice because a social impulse leads us to encounter differing opinions all of the time, and that we're always going to have to work with other people. And so it's not about how to fix belief for merely the individual, but for the community. And therefore, the method of tenacity in forming your belief doesn't really work. So he then goes, okay, well, if it's all about community and all of that, let the will of state act then. And this is where we start to feel a little bit 1984. So he's like, okay, well, if it's about community, let's look at the state choosing instead. then instead of that of the individual. Let an institution be created which shall have for its object to keep correct doctrines before the attention of the people, to reiterate them perpetually, and to teach them to the young, having at the same time power to prevent contrary doctrines from being taught, advocated, or expressed. Let all possible causes of a change of mind be removed from men's apprehensions. Let them be kept ignorant, lest they should learn of some reason to think otherwise than they do. Let their passions be enlisted, so that they may regard private and unusual opinions with hatred and horror. Then let all men who reject the established belief be terrified into silence. So this is getting very 1984. Like, okay, then, if we need this community, why don't we just have the authority or the state in charge of the beliefs that we have? And that then you just, if anyone has other opinions, we just terrify them into silence. Let the people turn out and tar and feather such men, or let inquisitions be made into the manner of thinking of suspected persons, and when they are found guilty of forbidden beliefs, let them be subjected to some signal punishment. When complete agreement should not otherwise be reached, a general massacre of all those who have not thought in a certain way has proved to be a very effective means of settling opinion in a country. And I mean, we've heard of this happening before. When people don't agree with you, you just kill off all the people who disagree. And I think you can probably already start to see where the problem of this particular view and how we form beliefs is going, what the problem's going to be here. And I'm sure you can think of many examples where we have had this happen throughout history, where countries have tried to control what their people think. If the power to do this be wanting, let a list of opinions be drawn up, to which no man of the least independence of thought can assent, and let the faithful be required to accept all these propositions in order to segregate them as radically as possible from the influence of the rest of the world. This method, from the earliest of times, has been one of the chief means of upholding correct theological and political doctrines. So, theological relating to God or the study of God, and political, obviously, politics. And this is how a lot of countries and religions have upheld their beliefs and of preserving their universal or Catholic character. In Rome, especially, it is in practice from the days of, sorry, I'm going to be really bad at pronouncing this, Numa Pompilius and those of Pius Nonus. This is the most perfect example in history. But wherever there is a priesthood, and no religion has been without one, this method has been more or less made use of. Wherever there is an aristocracy or a guild or any association of a class of men whose interests depend or are supposed to depend on certain propositions, there will always inevitably be found some traces of this natural product of social feeling. So we're saying here that anywhere that there is some sort of authority, there is going to be some sort of control over the beliefs that you have, wherever that actually is. And when we can think of this, like that, even like a few years ago with COVID, we did have some beliefs. We had things like if like vaccinations, mandatory vaccinations for COVID. And in more extreme cases, we have like in North Korea where people don't even have access to the internet so that they're not seeing the opinions of other people. There's, I guess, he's saying here that there are always going to be these in any sort of organized place where there is authority, and it's not something that we can really avoid. But this next bit in the green, I think, is the most important part. Cruelties always accompany this system, and when it is consistently carried out, they become atrocities of the most horrible kind in the eyes of any rational man. So here he's like, no matter what, like in this way where there's government or authority control over what the beliefs of the people are, there always ends up being some sort of atrocity. And I think the most I guess prominent example would probably be the Holocaust, where we have these atrocities from trying to control beliefs about certain things. We also see it in things like the Russian Revolution, but as I've said before, we also have modern examples like in North Korea. So it's any rational man would see these as atrocities, and that's, I guess, a weakness of this method of using authority, or the method of authority for belief. Nor should this occasion surprise, for the officer of a society does not feel justified in surrendering the interests of that society for the sake of mercy, as he might his own private interests. It is natural, therefore, that sympathy and fellowship should thus produce a most ruthless power. In judging this method of fixing belief, which may be called the method of authority, we must in the first place allow its immeasurable mental and moral superiority to the method of tenacity. So he's like, okay, this method is better mentally um, and morally. It's morally superior compared to tenacity, where we just kind of refuse to see anything else. Um, and also, he says its success is proportionately greater. In fact, it has over and over again worked the most majestic results. I mean, usually it has been successful for the cause to control the beliefs of the other people. I mean, there's massive atrocities with government controlling beliefs, but it is largely successful in getting the beliefs across because people are too frightened to believe anything else, really. The mere structures of stone which it has caused to be put together in Siam, for example, in Egypt and in Europe, have many of them a sublimity hardly more than rivaled by the greatest works of nature. And except the geological epochs, there are no periods of time so vast as those which are measured by some of these organized faiths. We've seen massive religions control beliefs, and those have lasted hundreds and hundreds of years. It obviously works, the belief, but if we scrutinize the matter closely, we shall find that there has not been one of their creeds which has remained always the same. Yet the change is so slow as to be imperceptible during one person's life. So the individual belief remains sensibly fixed. So we still do see changes between these beliefs that are held by the authority. So the success is greater than the method of tenacity. So what have we talked about in terms of the method of authority so far? We've said, well, its belief is established by the state or institution for correct doctrines. And he's about to say that for the mass of mankind, this is a good way and it brings a lot of peace. But it does have those cruelties and suppressions of thought, which makes us think of 1984. And we'll continue on with the next little notes I've put after we've read the next section. For the mass of mankind, then, there is perhaps no better method than this. It is their highest impulse to be intellectual slaves, and slaves they ought to remain. But no institution can undertake to regulate opinions upon every subject. Only the most important ones can be attended to, and the rest of men's minds must be left to the action of natural causes. This imperfection will be no source of weakness so long as men are in such a state of the culture that one opinion does not influence another. That is, so long as they cannot put two and two together. Which we know is not the case. Most people can put two and two together and put their two beliefs together and get new beliefs and things like that. Like we can't just completely control. So it's saying here that the most important ones we have problems with, not like the government or authority can't give you all of the opinions. There's always going to be some opinions that they can't control, some basic little opinions. And then the natural causes will come along and people can start to form their own opinions because the government can't police absolutely everything. But then that's a problem because then they start to put two and two together and start to diverge from the beliefs that have been held by the authority. But in the most priest-ridden states, some individuals will be found who are raised above that condition. These men possess a wider sort of social feeling. They see that men in other countries and other ages have held very different doctrines from those which themselves have been brought up to believe, and they cannot help seeing that it is the mere accident of their having been taught as they have, and of their having been surrounded with their manners and associations they have. This has caused them to believe as they do and not far differently, nor can their candor, honesty resist the reflection that there is no reason to rate their own views at a higher value than those of other nations and other centuries, thus giving rise to doubts in their minds. So what he's talked about here is it's not possible to regulate all of the opinions in the system. So you need to keep your people uneducated in these sorts of societies. But there will still be people who inevitably arise and will doubt the beliefs put forward by authority, because there's no way to absolutely police every single belief. And so the method of authority will ultimately fail. And we've seen this happen every single time we've used method of authority to dictate beliefs that we have throughout society. It always fails. There's always someone who stands up, well, most of the time, um, or we hope there would be, that people who will bring failure to this method. So it doesn't really work because people still have to think, and they even still have to think and make those small beliefs themselves. So it doesn't really work for all beliefs. So we need something else anyway. So he says they will further perceive that such doubts as these must exist in their minds with reference to every belief which seems to be determined by the caprice either of themselves or by those who originated the popular opinions. The willful adherence to a belief and the arbitrary forcing of it upon others must therefore both be given up. So they're like, okay, the method of authority doesn't work. So let's go to a different one. And he's going to call this the a priori method. A priori, prior, meaning before the senses. So beliefs from before the senses, which generally is about reason and being rational. He uses it slightly differently to how I would traditionally see a priori knowledge used. So take this sort of title with a grain of salt. But what he's talking about here is using reason and rationalizing to try and find beliefs. So he says a different new method of settling opinions must be adopted that shall not only produce an impulse to believe, but shall also decide what proposition is which to be believed. Let the action of natural preferences be unimpeded, then, and under their influence, let men, conversing together regarding matters in different lights, gradually develop beliefs in harmony with natural causes. This method resembles that by which conceptions of art have been brought to maturity. The most perfect example of it is to be found in the history of metaphysical philosophy. Systems of this sort have not usually rested upon any observed facts, at least not in any great degree. They have been chiefly adopted because of their fundamental propositions seemed agreeable to reason. So this is what he means by the a priori method is making beliefs that seem agreeable to reason. So, not just being what is comfortable, there is some reasoning or rationalization behind it. This is an apt expression. It does not mean that which agrees with experience, but that which we find ourselves inclined to believe. Plato, for example, finds it agreeable to reason that the distances of celestial spheres from one another should be proportional to the different lengths of strings which produce harmonious chords. Many philosophers have been led to their main conclusions by considerations like this, but this is the lowest and least developed form which the method takes. For it is clear that another man might find Kepler's theory, the theory that celestial spheres are proportional to the inscribed and circumscribed spheres of different regular solids, more agreeable to his reason. So he's giving this example. I think it's talking about it's some sort of science, stars, perhaps celestial spheres. What's not really important, it's not really important that you understand exactly what's being said here, but that we have some people following a reason that makes that seems to work, but then someone else uses a different form of reasoning and gets a different answer. So, in terms of the a priori method of belief formation, he says that it's what seems agreeable to reason. It is intellectual and respectable in comparison to the alternatives we've already looked at of authority and tenacity. But to he's about to show or about to explain that, but it's all to do with taste and fashion, these ways that reasoning works. It's to do with what is someone's personal taste and what is in fashion at the time, which means that even though it seems like it's like purposeful, it's actually beliefs that are being formed by accidental causes, which doesn't exactly work how we would want it to. And that's not really how we want our beliefs to be formed. So let's continue on to his reason. But the shock of opinions will soon lead men to rest on preferences of a far more universal nature. Take, for example, the doctrine that man only acts selfishly, that is, from the consideration that acting in one way will afford him more pleasure than acting in another. This rests not on no fact in the world, but it has had wide acceptance as being the only reasonable theory. And so he's saying that these sorts of beliefs about things like men are selfish or we should act selfishly don't come from facts. They just come from reason and reasonable theories, which doesn't seem quite right. Um, and here's where he says this method is far more intellectual and respectable from the point of view of reason than either of the others which we have noticed, but its failure has been the most manifest. It makes of inquiry something similar to the development of taste, but taste, unfortunately, is always more or less a matter of fashion, and accordingly, metaphysicians have never come to any fixed agreement. But the pendulum has swung backward and forward between a more material and a more spiritual philosophy from the earliest times to the latest, and so from this, which has been called the a priori method, we are driven. In Lord Bacon's phrase, to a true induction, we have examined into this a priori method as something which promised to deliver our opinions from their accidental and capricious element. But development, while it is a process which eliminates the effects of some causal circumstances, only magnifies that of others. This method, therefore, does not differ in a very essential way from that of authority. So he's like, this, because it's all to do with taste and fashion, we don't actually end up that different from the flaws that happen with authority. It's we're not actually forming our own beliefs, and it's going to have some atrocities just following reason. The government may not have lifted its finger to influence my convictions. I may have been left outwardly quite free to choose, we will say, between monogamy and polygamy. So he's giving the example of monogamy and polygamy. So monogamy being when someone has one partner or like romantic partner, and polygamy being multiple. And appealing to my conscience only, I may have concluded that the latter practice is in itself licentious, which means promiscuous or sexually unprincipled. Um, but when I come to see the chief obstacle to the spread of Christianity among people of as high culture as the Hindus has been a conviction of the immorality of our way of treating women. So he's like, okay, I could use reason. I could come to this belief that polygamy is wrong, that it's sexually unprincipled without having authority tell me, but it's still based on the tastes and the cultures of the time, which in which case it's not really, it's still sort of falling into that same problem as authority. And then he gives a second example of like when Hindus were not wanting to, I guess, convert to Christianity because they didn't agree with the way of treating women. And um, he says that I cannot help seeing that though governments do not interfere, sentiments in their development will be greatly determined by accidental causes. That religion is still playing a part of it. It's still forming the beliefs. So in the case of the a priori method of forming beliefs, it's not really a strong way to make sure that our beliefs are good. Now, there are some people among whom I must suppose that my reader is to be found, who, when they see that any belief of theirs is determined by any circumstance extraneous to the fact, will from that moment not merely admit in words that belief is doubtful, will experience a real doubt of it so that it ceases to be a belief. So he's now about to go into another alternative. He's very briefly going to touch on a higher power. So in this way, we sort of have 4.5 methods of belief formation. But he rejects this really quickly for higher power as part of forming our beliefs, and I'll read it in a bit. Essentially, it is just, he says that you looking to a higher power for our belief formation is just another method of tenacity. To satisfy our doubts, therefore, it is necessary that a method should be found by which our beliefs may be determined by nothing human, but by some external permanency, by something upon which our thinking has no effect. Some mystics imagine that they have such a method in a private inspiration from on high, but that is only a form of the method of tenacity in which the conception of truth as something public is not yet developed. Our external permanency should not be external in any sense. If it was restricted in its influence to one individual, it must be something which affects or might affect every man. And though these affections are necessarily as various as our individual conditions, yet the method must be such that the ultimate conclusion of every man shall be the same. So when we're looking for good beliefs, we need to have a method that ends up that all of the people end up with the same conclusion. If it's going to be an actual good one, we don't want differing opinions and things like that. And he says, finally, such is the method of science. So this is the method of belief formation he thinks is best. Such is a method of science. Its fundamental hypothesis, restated in more familiar language, is this. There are real things whose characters are entirely independent of our opinions about them. Those reals affect our senses according to regular laws, which this reminds me here of Clifford's uniformity of nature. There are regular laws that happen with science. And though our sensations are different, as are our relations to objects, yet by taking advantage of the laws of perception, we can ascertain by reasoning how things really and truly are. And any man, if he have sufficient experience and he have reason enough about it, will be led to the one true conclusion. If we're following this scientific method and everyone follows it and everyone uses their reason, they use their experience, hence why I've tabbed the experience question at the top here. If they're doing that, they'll all come to one same conclusion about that particular belief. So the method of science is a fundamental hypothesis that there are real things whose characters are independent of our opinions, and that realities affect our senses according to regular laws, which reminds me of Clifford's uniformity of nature. A person with sufficient experience and reason is led to one true conclusion. It's not multiple people coming up with lots of different views by following the same method of science. And the method of science he's about to tell us is the only method that gives a right and wrong way, because its test involves the application of the method itself. The fact that we know through science that the method of science is a good way to form beliefs is rather than subjective feelings or societal dictates. So it's something that helps strengthen that. And however, he is about to address that actually, though, am I just defining the definition with the word itself? Am I saying that the method of science is true because it's proven by the method of science? And he's about to unpack that for you. The new conception here involved is that of reality. It may be asked how I know that there are any reals or real things. Sorry, I'm gonna sneeze. Sorry. If there are any real things. If this hypothesis is the sole support of my method of inquiry, my method of inquiry must not be used to support my hypothesis. So he's like, oops, have I accidentally done some circular reasoning here? The reply is this. 1. If investigation cannot be regarded as proving there are real things, it at least does not lead to a contrary conclusion, but the method and conception on which it is based remain ever in harmony. No doubts of the method, therefore, necessarily arise from its practice, as is the case with all the others. The feeling which gives rise to any method of fixing belief is a dissatisfaction at two repugnant propositions. But here already is a vague concession that there is some one thing which a proposition should represent. Nobody, therefore, can really doubt that there are real things, for if he did, doubt would not be a source of dissatisfaction. So he's like, the fact that doubting things would suck. It feels bad to think that there might be no real things. That gives us a little bit of proof there. So how do we know there are real things? Science can reply that even if it can't prove this, it also does not lead to a contrary conclusion, that there are not real things, so we can't really doubt the method in that way. The hypothesis, therefore, is one which every mind admits, so that the social impulse does not cause men to doubt it. Everybody uses the scientific method about a great many things and only ceases to use it when he does not know how to apply it. Experience of the method has not led us to doubt it, but on the contrary, scientific investigation has had the most wonderful triumphs in the way of setting opinion. These afford the explanation of my not doubting the method or the hypothesis which it supposes, and not having doubt nor believing that anybody else whom I could influence has. It would be the merest babble for me to say any more about it. If there be anybody with a living doubt upon the subject, let him consider it. To describe the method of scientific investigation is the object of this series of papers. Obviously, we don't read them in the VCE study design. At the present, I only have room to notice some points of contrast between it and the other methods of fixing belief. So he's now going to sort of do a bit of a summary, but also tell us what are some good things and bad things about the different methods he has described. So remembering that there are four, kind of five if you count the religion one or the higher power one, but four overall. There is the method of tenacity. There is then the method of authority. There's the a priori method and the method of science. And I think he's saying that the method of science is the most reliable. It's been proven by science that it works to use scientific method to form our beliefs. But also the other options that we have are incredibly flawed. So here's the summary that he gives. This is the only one of the this is the only one of the four methods which presents any distinction of a right and wrong way, which is what I was talking about on the previous page. If I adopt the method of tenacity and shut myself out from all influences, whatever I think necessary to doing this is necessary according to that method. So with the method of authority, the state may try to put down here heresy by means which, from a scientific point of view, seem very ill calculated to accomplish its purposes. But the only test on that method is that what the state thinks, so that it cannot pursue the method wrongly. So with the a priori method, the very essence of it is to think as one is inclined to think. So metaphysicians will be sure to do that. However, they may be inclined to judge each other to be perversely wrong. The Hegelian, so relating to Hegel, the Hegelian system recognizes every natural tendency of thought as logical, although it be certain to be abolished by counter tendencies. Hegel thinks there is a regular system in the succession of these tendencies, in consequence of which, after drifting one way and the other for a long time, opinion will at last go right. And this is true that metaphysicians do get the right ideas at last. Hegel's system of nature represents tolerably the science of his day, and one may be sure that whatever scientific investigation shall have put out of doubt will presently receive a priori demonstration on the part of the metaphysicians. But with the scientific method, the case is different. Sorry, there I just had to save a bird from a window. So let me continue where I was up to. So we were talking about Hegel. Hegel thinks there is a regular system in the succession of these tendencies, in consequence of which, after drifting one way and the other for a long time, opinion will at last go right. And it is true that metaphysicians do get the right ideas at last. Hegel's system of nature represents tolerably the science of his day, and one may be sure that whatever scientific investigation shall have put out of doubt will presently receive a priori demonstration on the part of metaphysicians. But with the scientific method, the case is different. I may start with known and observed facts and proceed to the unknown, and yet the rules which I follow in doing so may not be such as investigation would approve. The test whether I am truly following the method is not an immediate appeal to my feelings and purposes, but, on the contrary, itself involves the application of the method. Hence, it is bad reasoning as well as good reasoning is possible. And this fact is the foundation of the practical side of logic. So the fact that there is a right way and a wrong way to use the scientific method, but there are only really right ways to use the other ones, show that the scientific method is like unbiased in a way, or it's not going to have as many problems as the other ways. It is not to be supposed that the first three methods of settling opinion present no advantage whatever over the scientific method. On the contrary, each has some peculiar convenience of its own. The a priori method is distinguished for its comfortable conclusions. So he's going through here are the strengths of these other ones and why people do go to them to form beliefs. So the a priori method is distinguished for its comfortable conclusions. We feel comfortable with that. It is the nature of the process to adopt whatever belief we're inclined to, and there are certain flatteries to the vanity of man which we all believe by nature, until we are awakened from our pleasing dream by rough facts. The method of authority will always govern the mass of mankind, and those who wield the various forms of organized force in the state will never be convinced that dangerous reasoning ought not to be suppressed in some way. If liberty of speech is to be untrammeled from the grosser forms of constraint, then uniformity of opinion will be secured by moral terrorism, to which the respectability of society will give its thorough approval. Following the method of authority is the path of peace. Certain nonconformities are permitted, certain others considered unsafe or forbidden. These are different in different countries and different ages, but wherever you are, let it be known that you seriously hold a tabooed belief, and you may be perfectly sure of being treated with cruelty less brutal, but more refined than hunting you like a wolf. Thus, the greatest intellectual benefactors of mankind have never dared, and dare not now, to utter the whole of their thought, and thus shade of prima facie, which means on the face of it, doubt, that is cast upon every proposition which is considered essential to the security of society. Singularly enough, the persecution does not all come from without, but a man torments himself and is oftentimes most distressed in finding himself believing propositions which he has been brought up to regard with aversion. The peaceful and sympathetic man will therefore find it hard to resist the temptation to submit his opinions to authority. But most of all, I admire the method of tenacity for its strength, simplicity, and directness. Men who pursue it are distinguished for their decision of character. We find people good that they will refuse to change their mind. They're strong, but it becomes very easy with such mental rule. They do not waste time in trying to make up their minds what they want, but fastening like lightning upon whatever alternative comes first. They hold it to the end, whatever happens, without an instant's irresolution. This is one of the splendid qualities which generally accompany brilliant and lasting success. It is impossible not to envy the man who can dismiss reason, although we know how it must turn out at last. Such are the advantages of the other methods of settling opinion have over scientific investigation. A man should consider well of them, and then he should consider that, after all, he wishes his opinions to coincide with the fact, and that there is no reason why the results of these first methods should do so. To bring about this effect is the prerogative of the method of science. Upon such considerations, he has to make his choice, a choice which is far more than the adoption of any intellectual opinion, which is one of the ruling decisions of his life to which then, when once made, he is bound to adhere. The force of habit will sometimes cause a man to hold on to old beliefs after he is in a condition to see that they have no sound basis, but reflection upon the state of the case will overcome these habits, and he ought to allow reflection in its full weight. People sometimes shrink from doing this, having an idea that beliefs are wholesome, which they cannot help feeling rest on nothing. But let such persons suppose an analogous through different case from their own. Let them ask themselves what they would say to a reformed Mussulman who should I don't even know how to say that. Sorry, guys. Um, who should hesitate to give up his old notions in regard for the relations of the sexes, or to a reformed Catholic who would still shrink away from reading the Bible? Would they not say these persons ought to consider the matter fully and clearly understand the new doctrine, then and they ought to embrace it in its entirety? But above all, let it be considered that what is more wholesome than any particular belief is integrity of belief, and that avoiding looking into the support of any belief from fear that it may turn out rotten is quite immoral as it is disadvantageous. So he's saying that holding a belief is having integrity, but avoiding challenging a belief is immoral. It's wrong. The person who confesses that there is such a thing as truth, which is distinguished from falsehood simply by this, that if acted on, it should, on full consideration, carry us to the point we aim at and not astray. And then, although convinced of this, dares not know the truth and seeks to avoid it, is in a sorry state of mind indeed. Yes, the other methods do have their merits. A clear logical conscience does cost something, just as any virtue, just as all that we cherish costs us dear, but we should not desire it to be otherwise. So he's like, yes, the scientific method does cost. There are things that cost us. The genius of a man's logical method should be loved and revered as his bride. So the fact we use a scientific method, we should love it like our bride, whom he has chosen from all the world. He need not condemn the others. On the contrary, he may honor them deeply, and in doing so, he only honors her the more. But she is the one that he has chosen, and he knows that she was right in making that choice. And having made it, he will work and fight for her, and will not complain that there are blows to take, hoping that there may be as many and as hard to give, and will strive to be the worthy knight and champion from the blaze of whose splendors he draws his inspiration and courage. So it should be loved and revered. And that brings us to the end of that reading. I hope that that has been helpful and gives you some ideas about how should we form beliefs. Have a think of which of the four different methods of belief formation you think is the best. I think most of us would probably agree the scientific method is, but the more important reason is why is that better? So thank you for listening. Have an absolutely excellent day, and I will see you in the next video.